In terms of the next stage of this, there is a real danger, isn't there, that Israel is falling into a trap set by Hamas?
I think that's exactly the point. I mean, Hamas appeared to want to attack, provoke a response, and the indication of what happens now is Israelis are almost like following Hamas's strategy, which is to provoke a reaction. 1 million people now made effectively displaced within the area, and a whole danger of mass casualties, which will turn the world against it. So I'm curious about what Israel is trying to do. Of course, they want to defeat Hamas, but really to do it Hamas's way seems to me to be self-defeating.
And it seems odd to me that we've spent days talking about this imminent ground incursion that's coming, and suddenly we've got the Israeli military saying, well, we may not be actually about to engage in a ground incursion. And how much of that do you think is down to the US president?
I think the word of caution has finally got through to the Israelis that the world opinion is not going to accept kind of mass Palestinian casualties, even if it's, if you like, in the end of a good aim. But I think there's also an operational and tactical reason for it as well. Indeed, senior Israeli commentators, including Ehud Barak, who's a head of their armed forces and a previous prime minister, has been urging caution not to destroy Hamas, but take your time, understand the situation, get the intelligence in place, use special forces, use very discreet, precise operations, and avoid a mass ground offensive.
So just in terms of the end game, Israel says its goal is to crush and destroy Hamas. But really what happens now is anyone's guess, really. Even the White House, I think, believes that Israel doesn't even know what the end game is.
I think that's fair, and I think it's the other thing that, again, I'm been very impressed by the commentary that's come out from people like Ehud Barak and others. They're saying it's not enough simply to talk in terms of the tactical defeat of an enemy. You've got to say what's the position. The neighbourhood isn't going to change. The numbers of Palestinians who live in there is not going to change. So how is Israel going to live with them for the future? And I think it's the right time now to ask Israel those questions. And does their offensive lead to a sensible end game, or is it just simply about destruction?
There's a great article in the Telegraph this morning by James Rothwell, or maybe last night actually, that talks about the 6 options available to Israel. Now, what does Israel do? Does it actually go in? Now, clearly it wants to destroy Hamas, but not turn the Palestinian people against Israel. Does it go in and divide Gaza and then call part of it Israel, part of it Palestinian territory? Does it occupy it completely? All of these have been warned against by Biden, because there's real danger here.
There is, and actually it also goes away from the, if you like, the trend of how Israel's been operating, which has been to withdraw from territories they took in war. They withdrew from Gaza from 2005, and they made a very clear decision then that they were not going to achieve their security aims by actually occupying the territory. Now, this doesn't apply necessarily in the West Bank, but in Gaza they could see no point to doing that. I don't think those fundamental circumstances have changed. You know, trying to hold down a population who do not want to be occupied is a very difficult and a very long game.
So in terms of that, it's so complicated, and there are lots of other questions about whether Netanyahu himself inadvertently empowered Hamas, because obviously Netanyahu, I think, has obviously they withdrew in 2005 from Gaza. As a result of that, Hamas has had this time to become organised. We talked about the network of tunnels, for example, but also really just in terms of Netanyahu, how do you view his legacy?
I think it's an abysmal one. I mean, the first thing about the support of Hamas, he appeared to be at the time more interested in dividing the Palestinian Authority. So, in other words, making the Palestinian leadership between the West Bank and Gaza weak. And he thought the way to do that was basically to allow Hamas to grow in Gaza and therefore diminish the authority in the West Bank as well. I think it's also been abysmal in terms of the leadership of this particular series of incidents happened. And there's very clear evidence of the way in which the division in Israel that's been ongoing prior to the attack on October the 7th may well have badly affected the way in which the security and the intelligence departments looked at the world.
And also, this article that I was reading this morning says that actually Netanyahu has sort of ignored some of the incursions, and actually he should have taken a much firmer line, or indeed used this as an opportunity to come to some sort of peace accord.
Yeah, and I think his difficulty is that he's not very good at making peace. He sees making war as the way to do this, to keep people divided, and then basically play, and I'll use a crude expression, play whack-a-mole. So whenever there's an incursion, you whack that down. What you don't do is with the problem with the moles as a whole. And I think that's where he's his failure has been. He's not allowed the Palestinian Authority to grow. Gaza's been weakened economically, and in those conditions of misery, Hamas appear to have an answer to the Palestinian people's prayers. That's a disastrous place to get yourself to.
So in terms of an end game, if you were advising him, what is the end game?
The end game must be some kind of peaceful resolution. Of course, Hamas must be destroyed. They must be militarily defeated and actually not be able to rise again. But you've got to find a solution that actually allows the Palestinian people to live decent, secure lives. And that will require compromise on both sides.
And how do you do that, though? You've got Palestinian people on the move, frightened for their lives, with no water, no power, no electricity, nothing, moving to the south. Meanwhile, Israel is in this state where we think this offensive may take place. Now, how on earth do you do that? How do you rid it of Hamas but keep the Palestinian people on side?
Well, what you need to start doing is allowing humanitarian aid through. So you need to let the water through to the areas in the south you've got there. And you also, if you tell people to move to the south, so moving south of what they call Wadi Gaza, then you don't attack them down there.
Well, so that's a great point, because missiles were fired into the very area that Israel has told the people to go to.
Yes, and you can't do both. You simply can't be, unless your role is, or your desire is, let's be horrible about it, so ethnic cleansing on a massive scale, then you really can't do that. If you tell people to move to a safe area, that's a safe area, and you have to accept the military consequences of that, which means, and of course there'll be Hamas terrorists in that area, but for the time being, while that area is a refugee area, it's off bounds and you need to not fire at it.
And so, just in terms, and the other day we were talking about the solution, does this mean that actually minds are now concentrated? Because in terms of escalation, the last thing we need is for this to escalate. And obviously, we talked about the role of Lebanon, also Iran, for example, and then the brokering countries of Qatar, I think we talked about the other day as well. We don't want this to escalate. And this people are treading on eggshells here. Obviously, the US president taking this seriously. You've got the 2 US naval vessels out there. You've got the British vessels out there as well. This simply cannot be allowed to spiral out of control. Our minds now focused on having a long-term solution.
I hope so. So that it's tempered by recognising, and we must all recognise, that what's happened to Israel is a grievous harm, and recognising they must be allowed to deal with Hamas. But as you said, simply creating destruction, simply defeating Hamas and leaving the Palestinian people alone without some long-term solution, I think would be a very foolish thing to do.